and welcome to 101 Ways to Market Your Language program. This is the 5th. We're halfway through our series of 10 webinars on marketing of language programs and literacy programs. Welcome to those of you who are new joining us today, and welcome back to those of you who have been here before. We've got a couple of people that keep coming back, and I have to tell you that I'm always so thrilled to see the names that I've seen before, as well as new ones, but I love to get to know people, and for me that happens a little bit over time as we continue the conversations, and I am able to engage with you and ask you questions and hear your side of what you're doing as well, and what makes sense for you in your, I guess, leadership practice and administrative practice leading a language or literacy program. Thanks, George, for letting us know that you're tuning in from Costa Rica today. I'm watching the chat box in the lower right-hand area there. Hi, Cynthia. Welcome back. So, George, yes, welcome from Costa Rica, and you're the owner of a company specializing in ESL or English classes to companies and professionals. Super. So, for those of you who, even if you know each other, maybe go ahead and type in the chat box where you're tuning in from today. I think we have folks here from Alberta and from Ontario and from, let's see if I can remember, Indiana maybe? In the US? I think that's where, maybe if memory serves me from the last couple of sessions. I think it's great that everybody's tuning in from all these different places. Spruce Grove, love Spruce Grove, great little place in Alberta. When I first moved to Calgary, which is where I live now, we had some family friends in Spruce Grove. The Tachaks are their names. They're Mr. and Mrs. Tachak, both taught up there for a long time, and their daughter Tammy was my roommate when I went to university in Halifax, which is where I grew up. And then when I moved to Alberta, they basically became my homestay family for a couple of weeks when I was coming to the University of Calgary, and they drove me down here and helped me look for a place to live and so forth. So I have really fond memories of Spruce Grove. Thunder Bay, super. Okay, Ohio, fantastic. And super Indiana, wonderful. Okay, great. Well, let's get started with today's program. So that you know, like the other programs, today's program is being recorded, and then I post the recordings publicly on YouTube and on the blog afterwards, so others who can't be here with us live today can enjoy the program. We've had 4 sessions so far, covering everything from marketing strategies and plans to business cards and how to sort of craft your message in a positive way. And today we're going to be looking at sort of what makes you unique. And I'll go into a little bit of details about that when we have a quick run through the rest of the session. Next week, we're going to be focusing on large institutional programs. Oh, super. I just noticed that Joe's been to Calgary and the Canadian Rockies. Wonderful. Yeah, so next week we're focusing on sort of universities and programs that have to work as part of a larger program or within a larger program at another school or institution. That's how I started out in this sector, and I've got a real soft spot for small programs that struggle as part of big organizations. And then week number 7, we'll look at the power of connection with your prospective students, and as well some PR with others in your community, whether that means outreach with funders or partners or community businesses that you're looking to make some connections with. That was week number 7 is essentially going to focus on that 5th P of marketing, right? If you remember, we had product, we had place, we had the one that most people focus on, which is promotion. Then we had price. We talked a little bit about that in, I think it was week number 2. And then so the 5th P that they're talking about, we marketers are talking about in the 21st century is the power of partnerships. So that's what we'll be talking about in week number 7. Week number 8 is the sort of emotional side, or the relationship basis behind marketing, how it's quite different from sales, why it's more difficult to track marketing than it is to track sales, and then following up in week number 9, that's the piece that many administrators just don't have time for because they get overwhelmed. And week number 10 is all about social media for marketing. So today we're going to be focusing on number 5, which is what makes you unique and how this relates to marketing. We'll go over, we have 3 things to do today. We're going to talk about what sets you and your program apart from other programs. I found particularly when I work with literacy programs or English as a second language programs that have quite general offerings, that can be a difficult thing to do when you're developing your marketing, and yet very useful as you're trying to figure out how to develop a marketing or public relations plan to kind of make your mark in a community and as well attract learners and support from around you, whether that's students or funders or just general support. We'll use some marketing lingo here that often educators don't learn in educational administration or management courses. We're going to get kind of into some business language, if you can forgive me for the business language, but we're going to talk a little bit about horizontal and vertical markets and what that might mean to you. And then we'll look a little bit at program packaging. And I've read some articles lately on sort of what the trends are in educational programming. So I thought I'd share those with you because I found them pretty exciting and also interesting from a learning point of view. So we're going to start by talking a little bit about this idea that comes to us from business, isn't always used very much in education, and that's the idea of a unique selling proposition. So as you know, the ideas and the topics for these webinars come from 101 Ways to Market Your Language program. And as I've said before, I say it every week, this is the second edition. It came out in 2005. It's in desperate need of an update, so you don't need to go buy it. But one of the things I talk about in here is what makes you unique. I didn't use the language unique selling proposition because I was really trying to avoid a lot of business language. I know that educators and people who work in nonprofits struggle with notions of business for education. And I don't know if that's the case with anyone here. Does anyone here kind of struggle, I mean, philosophically or ethically with notions of business in education? And I have an article here I wanted to share with you. I'm going to write the fellow's name down here. His name's Cooper Ryder. And he wrote this article. He's the sort of the father, if you will, of appreciative inquiry. And he wrote an article. I don't know if I have the title quite exact here, but if you Google it, you'll find something along these lines. He wrote an article like something called How Business Can Change the World for the Better or Make the World a Better Place, something along those lines. Cooper Ryder's approach is very strength-based and asset-based, does a lot of work with nonprofit organizations, but also sort of takes the best parts of business, so not the corporate greed and not the corruption and not all that stuff that makes everybody roll their eyes, even those who work in large corporations, but sort of the heart or essence, if you will, of entrepreneurship and, wanting to sort of contribute to the world through that, creative way that, can, I guess, generate revenue or financial sustainability for an organization, and how that is not necessarily bad. So even though I talk about incorporating business practices, I do it with the notion of creating a learning organization that's financially stable over the long term. So it's not about corporate greed or anything like that, but really, we have these learning organizations, you do good work in the world, you make a great difference for your learners, and so how do you keep doing that? That's part of the reason for doing all of this marketing. And this idea of a unique selling proposition, or a USP, is something that I think is worth considering. I've got today's resource that I'll share with you at the end is basically it's a discussion sheet for you to share at your next staff meeting. Ask people and sort of drive some discussion and deeper thinking around really what is it that makes you unique. And the questions around a unique selling proposition are basically what makes you different or unique or better than everybody else. And then driving that even deeper is how do you prove that? Well, I'm going to go back here. How do you prove what makes you better or different from anyone else? So let me just throw the question out there now. Have any of you kind of considered this sort of question before in staff meetings, or maybe if you're working with a fundraising committee, if you're a literacy organization, something like that, in terms of identifying characteristics that make your organization wonderfully unique and different? Oh, super, great. Yeah, worked with Dale Chap of Case Western University. Yeah, I really enjoy David Cooper Ryder's work. For me, he presents a sensible nexus between business and nonprofit, in some ways similar to, but not exactly the same as Jim Collins. Yeah, Jim Collins is another fellow that I like. He wrote the book called Good to Great. I'll just put it there. And Good to Great is about corporate organizations And I thought it was interesting because I do like to learn about business, but he's got a small little self-published actually monograph called Good to Great and the Social Sectors, and it's takes some of the same ideas from Good to Great but looks at them from not a profit generating kind of perspective. So the bottom line doesn't indicate success, but the indicators for success are what makes you I guess, have an impact on the world, and what difference are you making as a social organization. That really resonated with me from whether it's a nonprofit or education. Yeah. Um, Interesting. Yeah, I think there's some talk of that with ESL schools here as well in Canada, and something to consider when you're talking with your colleagues or other managers is this: there's an ideal or a notion. This is a little bit off topic, but I think it's important. Um, there's the idea of what's called a double bottom line. Oh, I should put that line in there. Double bottom line. And the idea comes from social enterprise. We could probably talk a little bit about this in a future program if you want. But there's the idea that on one end of a continuum, there's a profit-driven business. On the other end of a continuum is a nonprofit or donation-driven business. And the donation-driven business has no need to make money, and in fact no mandate to make money, whereas the profit-driven business is all about the bottom line. And that the idea is it's not black or white, it's not either or, but rather there's this range, and you can sort of pinpoint or plot where you are as an organization on your on this range. And in the middle of that is what's known as the social enterprise or a socially responsible business. And those kinds of organizations can have this double bottom line where you actually have two sets of criteria that indicate your success. One set of criteria is your bottom line financially, and the other set of criteria is the difference you make in the world. So in other words, how many clients are you serving? How many, in terms of if you have to do literacy scores or benchmarking, for example, in Canada we have the Canadian language benchmarks. Are your students moving up in a benchmark, or do you have some testing or assessment? We know that tests aren't, absolutely perfect, but do you have some way to indicate progress for those clients that you serve? And so that difference you're making for them becomes part of your social bottom line. So has anybody sort of talked about these ideas in their organization? And I think because of the people we have here, we have people both in revenue generating organizations and nonprofit organizations. From a marketing point of view, knowing sort of what makes you different or better from, and when I say better, I don't mean we're good and they're bad. I'm really a firm believer in learning organizations working as collaborators, even if they are competitors. There's a lot to be gained from, referring people to other schools when you can't serve them, learning from your competitors, and so forth. So I'm a big, big believer in the collaboration and partnership. And so today's resource, as I said, is to talk about, it's okay to talk about what makes you unique, and in doing so it doesn't mean that you're putting down another school, but just kind of looking to celebrate and identify what's wonderful about what you do. And then in terms of marketing as well, we can talk about two different sorts of markets. There's a horizontal market and a vertical market. Has anyone heard these terms before or worked with them at all in management or administration of programs? It'll kind of help me figure out how much time I should budget for these. Okay. This is, again, it comes from business, so if you work in nonprofit, then you may not have heard these terms before. I'll kind of go through them. A horizontal market is basically, it's a broad market. So something that has a broad general appeal to people out there. And the product itself is pretty general, and it often has a lower price. So for example, we could look at toilet paper as having a horizontal market. It's people are broad general appeal. We need it to do a certain job, and the price of it as a product in the general marketplace is fairly low. Right? And if you look at, for example, a language program, beginner, intermediate, and advanced, whatever those might mean for you in your organization, those would be a horizontal offering for a language program. We offer beginner Spanish or intermediate ESL, or we offer basic reading for adults or a GED program, for example. And so those would be your horizontal markets. Vertical markets, on the other hand, are considered deep as opposed to broad. They're also quite specialized. So that means you're looking at specialized courses here, and they often have a higher price for them. So if you're a language school, for example, a pronunciation course or a specialized course, they used to call them ESP courses in English as an additional language. It would be ESP stood for English for Specific Purposes. So English for engineers, for example, English for foreign trained medical professionals. These courses require often more specialized staff to teach them. They may command a higher price, in part due to the fact that you may need to pay more to an instructor with specialized skills, even though some schools and organizations kind of have a bit of a policy against that, or it's based on a teacher's credentials and so forth. But often that you'll be looking at these vertical markets. I'm just going to take a second here to read what Joe wrote. Yes. Yeah, interesting. Okay, great point, Joe. Yeah, and there are some businesses actually that almost operate as nonprofits because they don't generate a lot of revenue, or they don't generate a lot of profit, or they'll reinvest their profit back into the business enough to indicate that they may have a profit in terms of being able to demonstrate success, but it's a minimal profit. One of the great things that Jim Collins does talk about in Good to Great is companies that have demonstrated success over a long period of time, like say 50 years or something like that, have often had the common characteristic that they have more than just a bottom line focus. I'm just going to look on my bookshelf here and see if I happen to have it. Oh, here it is. I'll show it to you. This is the book I was talking about, Good to Great. It's a wonderful business read, and it's available in most bookstores because this has been a bestseller on the New York Times. What hasn't been a bestseller is his little social monograph. Look on my bookshelf. I'm sure I have it. Let me just see if I might have it in my cupboard here. I think I've lent it to someone and I didn't get it back. Anyway, that one I got off Amazon.com. Unfortunately, it was just a little paperback, and it's about a quarter of the thickness of this, and it's about the same price because, interestingly enough, he got a major publisher for the book that he wrote on corporations, but he had to self-publish the book that he wrote about nonprofits. Be that as it may, it's definitely worth the read. So if it were me, well, I read it in the order of this one first, and then I read the one on the social sectors, and I thought it was a great way to understand the sort of basic ideas he was getting across. So if you have a hankering to visit Amazon later, that would be one of the resources that I would share with you. Yeah, agreed. Yeah, established corporations have charitable contributions as a line item. Absolutely. In fact, most universities in Canada, that's how they operate as well. They're corporations, nonprofit, I think, corporations. Yeah. So these vertical markets can command a higher price, and in terms of you doing marketing, they may attract specialized students or students with special skills that you might not necessarily have in your general courses, or you could have students in both a general course and a specialized course. The idea is to mix up or have a mix of both horizontal and vertical offerings for your clients or your students or your learners, so that you're attracting, your bread and butter courses are your horizontal ones, your general ones, and then you can often generate more revenue with specialized courses. Or if you're putting in a funding grant for specialized courses, you can often up the line item for things such as instructor salaries a little bit and make a case that you might need an instructor with more highly specialized skills for programs such as that. And you can justify budget line items in your proposals to funders by saying that you're targeting a vertical market. Yeah, thanks, Carla. Yeah, was that the social sectors book that you were talking about there, the little paperback? Um, and then, so one of the things I'll challenge you to take back to your organizations is looking at your marketing mix. The idea is that an effective organization, in terms of education, if that's what your product offering is that you have a mix that will work for you over time and help you serve both broad markets and vertical markets as well. Okay, let me just take a second to look at George's question here. How do you justify the cost difference in a market that really just lumps all ESL classes as the same? Oh, that's a great question. What we used to do in the program where I worked was we would often keep the prices about the same, but we would decrease the number of hours slightly so that we were paying the instructors a little bit less, and that way we were sort of giving the perception that we weren't sort of overcharging for courses. So we might have had, I'm just trying to think back to what we would normally do. We would have had evening classes, I think they were 24 or 22 hours in length, but the specialized courses were 16 to 18 hours in length. And they would have run on the same nights, but maybe not for as long. They might have been an hour and a half or something like that, but it was to kind of have less hours. So essentially, they came out at a higher revenue for us. Does that answer your question at all? I hope it does. And then there's the idea of how do you offer what you offer in terms of packaging your programs. I've been really excited lately to read that there's a trend in education towards shorter courses. So I don't know how many hours your courses are. I'd be interested to learn how long your average course might be, whether it's 20 hours or 30 hours or something like that. Apparently there's a trend now, particularly with adult education, non-formal, so continuing education type programs, of having shorter courses, but having them more often and having more variety in the types of courses that are offered. So I just got a call the other day from a colleague at the university, and they are restructuring one of their language certificate programs. So not ESL, but this was a foreign language that they offer a certificate in for adults. And she said, these 30-hour programs, we can't get people to register because the parents now seem to be busier with taking kids to soccer and everything they need to do. Or they're traveling more with their jobs, and we can't sell our 30-hour courses. So they're looking now at having even 15-hour courses or 18-hour courses, having more courses, and then having even 2 certificates. Might have a foundation level certificate and then a comprehensive or an advanced level certificate, whereas before there was just one kind of certificate for language proficiency. So I thought I would throw that out there for discussion and ask if anybody else has sort of seen this trend or heard these kind of conversations in wherever you work about not being able to either keep learners in courses that are a certain length or having trouble attracting people to courses that are a little bit longer. Oh, wow. Okay, that does seem a little bit complex. George is saying 4, 8, or 12 months, but assigning a teacher's got to travel to the student's home or office. I can see where that would be logistically complex. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. In a case like that, it would be more difficult to have short courses. That was something I observed as a trend, or I've seen, in a couple of articles and talking with some colleagues. And these are courses that are held at institutions. So you're trying to bring the students to you, right? You're flipping it around and it sounds like you're taking the teacher to the student. And in a business case, I could definitely understand the idea of having a longer term commitment than from the students, both in terms of planning and in terms of the finances for that. Yeah. Okay, so Corey, you guys have 32-hour courses. And do you have anything that's shorter? I'm kind of curious to know. Yeah. And the idea of offering variety in the courses, but just enough. So there's a couple of different things that can happen. We can offer the same courses over and over and over again, which has the bonus or the good side of being consistent, and the the downside of, okay, well, there's nothing new here for me. I've seen it before, I've done it before, and you want to be able to offer some variety. But there's also with most learning organizations, that you can dilute it, or you don't have enough either students to drive the market, or you don't have enough instructors, even if there is demand, to fill all of the courses that you have. Yeah, okay, so looking at what Corey's saying here, offering the English course, so it's 8 weeks, twice a week. Okay, super. Just the one course so far, wanting to expand. Yeah, and so the idea is to offer some variety, but just enough to kind of keep the students interested and let them know, that you've got new stuff coming out. One of the great things, you got any TED Talk fans here? Malcolm Gladwell, who wrote Blink, and he wrote Outliers and The Tipping Point. He has a wonderful TED Talk that you can download both as an audio file. The first time I heard it, I listened to it on my iPod as I was going for a walk, or you can watch the video. He's talking in this one about, it's kind of about marketing and business, but I saw a lot of applications for it in education as well. The idea that, they sent a guy out to find out, what's the best recipe for Pepsi, for example. And the researcher comes back and found out there isn't a best recipe for Pepsi. All these food companies want to get the best recipe for it. He came back and said, no, the market has an appetite for different kinds of Pepsi. So, and hence we can see it now, particularly in food. We've got Diet Pepsi and caffeine-free Pepsi and regular Pepsi, and Coke tried the cherry Coke, and that's often talked about as a big marketing flop. Not marketing flop, but a sales flop, I guess. But the idea that there are different palates and different appetites for different kinds of tastes. Well, I thought about that and thought, well, what if we took that and applied it to education? There's different appetites for different kinds of courses. And I'm guessing that you would have heard echoes of that from your own students as well. No, I just want conversation, or I just want, I don't really want grammar, was the one that I have often heard. And I would try and make a case for them to enjoy grammar as much as I did, which I would say I did that with varying degrees of success. But, the idea that, okay, well, we want to be able to offer them things that are meaningful to them as well. And certainly put the foundations under things and know that the foundation is the building block for something else. But if you're looking at, for example, a vertical market, what do your students have an appetite for? It can be difficult to determine. So that was one resource I wanted to share with you today. I'll do this for you. I put it there as a short form, http //bit.ly/td/tak. And there you go. That should make it clickable for you. And there's one other book that I found very powerful, and an earlier version of this, so this is Guerrilla Marketing for Nonprofits. An earlier version of Guerrilla Marketing, written back in the 80s, helped me when I was writing this book. So there's the kind of the father, if you will, of Guerrilla Marketing. It's J. Conrad Levinson. And J. Conrad Levinson wrote the original Guerrilla Marketing series back in the 1980s. And now you see guerrilla marketing all over the place, and guerrilla this and guerrilla that. There's this kind of concept now behind guerrilla marketing. And J. Conrad Levinson wrote this book with Frank Adkins and Chris Forbes. I think it came out in 2011, maybe 2010. It's pretty new though. It turns out that Frank Adkins is his son-in-law, and Chris Forbes is a person who works a lot in the faith-based communities in the United States and does lots of marketing for churches. When the book first came out, I had the chance, someone sent me a review copy, and I reviewed the book on my blog and got a chance to interview Chris in a marketing webinar about the book. And I was fascinated by the one thing Chris kept saying, and that was he talks about nonprofits, and I found it as well in education, that organizations will often give up just before their marketing has become effective. We've talked a little bit about this in this series, right? I'll just let that phone, should go to voicemail here in just a second, with apologies that it's so close to us here. Yeah, the idea, don't give up. keep marketing your programs. If it doesn't cost you anything to keep them in your calendar for an extra semester, then by all means keep them there. So in addition to the Jim Collins book, if you have one that you can, a marketing budget for this in your organization, Guerrilla Marketing for Nonprofits, I found it really digestible and really easy to understand. It just made good sense. And there's lots of business principles, but there's also lots of philosophy and ethics around nonprofit that applied equally to education as well. So that pretty much wraps up some of the content for this week. Next week, we'll focus on specialty tips for large institutions. And I'll stay on for a couple of minutes as well and answer questions and get some of your feedback. This week's resource is a worksheet. I didn't know what else to call it. It's not just a worksheet. It's a conversation starter. And what I would really love for it to be used for is that you would, have it at a staff meeting or pass it around to key stakeholders to be able to say, okay, what is it that makes us unique and different? If we're looking at developing a public relations plan or marketing strategy, to be able to identify those things that really make you stand out. In my experience, it's often not just product oriented at a school or a nonprofit learning organization, but sometimes what makes you different is how much your instructors can demonstrate their sincere care for the learners. So it's not just about product, right? But if you can say, we've got these instructors, they've lived in our community for 30 years. These folks, they really love the students and they love the learners. They're so dedicated to what they do. That may be what actually makes you unique. So when you look at this unique selling proposition, I would say don't just look at it in terms of the courses that you have or the material goods, they might say in business, but look at the emotional side. Look at the intangible side and say, okay, is there some characteristic that it's really hard to kind of articulate what it is that makes us special? Try to articulate it. My guess is that for educational programs, that what makes you different from your competitors may actually be something human-based rather than course-based or product-based. That's all ready for you to download and go ahead and share with your colleagues around the office now and start those discussions. And you can use this at your next staff meeting if you have them, marketing strategy meetings, which if you don't have them, I hope you're going to start having them soon. And there's my Twitter address, and we can connect on LinkedIn if you want. And I'll leave the room open here for a couple of minutes and hang around and answer your questions. I'll turn off the recording though and say thanks for being here. I really appreciate it, and I will see you again next week.